I don't know who needs to hear this, but disrespect rarely shows up loud. It shows up as something that we laugh off. The most damaging disrespect usually doesn't announce itself. It comes dressed up as things like, I'm just messing with you, I'm just joking, or jokes that take it a little bit too far. Disrespect often comes in the form of backhanded compliments. Like, for example, people tell me things like, you talk pretty white for a black guy. Or for the females, people will say things like, you're kind of pretty for a big girl. Usually we just laugh that kind of stuff off because we don't want to make the situation feel awkward or more tense. We don't want to come across as somebody that's being too sensitive. Or my favorite, people will use a moment of your vulnerability as the opportunity to tell you what they really think about you. And they disguise that discontent that they have for you as, I'm just being real with you right now. When they had every other opportunity to be real with you, but that's when they choose to be yes men. But when they see you down and out and they see you vulnerable, that's when they want to be real with you. And sometimes when it happens, you do notice it and you want to call it out, but it feels awkward. And then that's when you tell yourself, I ain't tripping on it, man. It ain't really no big deal. But every time you do that, you're sending a signal out to that person and to yourself that that level of treatment is acceptable. But when that happens, don't laugh that off, because what starts off as a small laugh becomes the new normal. Your standards start to drop quietly. You barely even notice. And then by the time the disrespect becomes loud and obvious, the damage has already been done. And then the pattern became normalized long before it was even visible. And this applies to how you talk to yourself too. Like when you laugh off your own failures or minimize your own shortcomings. And I get it. Finding humor when you fall short, it is healthy, to a certain extent. Because you definitely don't want to get to the point where you start to be too hard on yourself. But you also don't want to cross that threshold of where you laugh at your own shortcomings so much that it's almost like you start making fun of yourself, almost to the point of bullying, if that makes sense. Because that's internal mass disrespect, and that begins to erode your self-esteem, which is the reputation that you have with yourself. The same way that external disrespect erodes your reputation with others. Respect is less about how others treat you than it is about what you will accept. And there's only two options. You can either acknowledge it or you can ignore it. So the question I ask you is, which version are you reinforcing?